My name is Bob Kingston, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm Portland Opera's resident historian and lecturer. I want to thank you for coming this afternoon, such a beautiful day. Mozart's Marriage of Figaro. One of the questions that audiences often ask me has to relate to what we know about how the composer responded to an opera, to a piece of music. And with this opera, as with so many of Mozart's operas, we actually know very little about what went into the composition of this work. Mozart was usually busy, so he didn't have a lot of time to write down his thoughts. He was also working in the city in which the opera debuted, so there was really no need to exchange letters with people he saw on a regular basis. His most frequent correspondent was his father, Leopold, and we have very little in the way of letters exchanged between them, or at least that have survived. I want to read to you a little excerpt from a letter that Leopold wrote to his daughter, Mozart's sister Nannerl, and it was dated November 11th, 1785. He writes, "At last I received a letter from your brother consisting of 12 lines. He excuses himself because he's up to his ears in the midst of finishing the opera Les Nozze di Figaro. I know the piece, it is a difficult play, and the translation from the French into an opera must certainly be free if the opera is to be effective. God willing, the action will be good, and I don't doubt the music. But it will cost him much running back and forth and disputing until the book is organized in such a way that he can set to work on it. And he will have put it off and taken his good time with it, as is his usual custom. Now he must get work in earnest on it because Count Rosenberg, who is the administrator of the theater, is pressing him." So what we get in that letter is some very interesting information about this work as it begins to take shape. We know that Mozart probably started working on the Marriage of Figaro sometime in the fall or late summer of 1785. It debuted on May 1st, 1786. It was originally supposed to have premiered slightly earlier than that, but for a variety of reasons that premiere was delayed. We know that Mozart's father was familiar with the play that served as the basis for the opera. That's Beaumarchais' Le Folle Journée ou le Mariage de Figaro, the Crazy Day or the Marriage of Figaro. And Leopold wasn't alone. All of Europe knew this play. It had premiered in Paris in 1784 and immediately created something of a scandal, largely because of the content of the play, which was an assault on the old order, on aristocracy and the abuses of the aristocracy, but also because that play itself had also been delayed in premiere, and the playwright Beaumarchais was very active in initiating a campaign to get the work premiered. So by the time it premiered in Paris in 1784, everyone knew about it before it had even made it to the stage. So there was a great anticipation. Once Mozart begins working on it, everyone knows this play. We also know that Mozart's working habits, at least according to his father, were typically to put things off, to wait to the last minute, and that it often caused him some problems. And we know that someone involved with the administration of the theater in Vienna, the court theater, had been pressing him to get this work going. Much beyond that, our knowledge of how this work came into being is limited really to the memoirs of the man who wrote the libretto for the opera, Lorenzo da Ponte, who also worked with Mozart on the librettos for Don Giovanni and Così fan tutte. Da Ponte is somewhat of an unreliable chronicler of his relationship with Mozart. He wrote his memoirs when he was living in the United States, some 40 years after the fact. And he was given to, well, let's say he liked to give himself more credit than was perhaps his due for this relationship with Mozart. We do know from Da Ponte's memoirs that it was Mozart who had the idea of setting this play, probably not very long after Mozart got to know it himself. Da Ponte tells us in his memoirs that the Emperor Joseph II, the Emperor of Austria, had banned performances of Beaumarchais' play, but he allowed it to be printed. Apparently, a work as scandalous as The Marriage of Figaro is slightly less scandalous if you can read it rather than seeing it performed. And Da Ponte says he met with the emperor to convince him that this would be a suitable work for an operatic treatment. Again, the implication seems to be that a work is a little bit less dangerous or scandalous if it's turned into an opera in another language. So, and Da Ponte says that the emperor eventually agreed. So our understanding of how this work came into being is really rather limited. What we have is the end result. Now I want to talk just a little bit about Mozart in Vienna leading up to the creation of this work. Mozart moved to Vienna in 1781. He immediately staked out a reputation not so much as a composer, but rather as a teacher and also as a performer. He was a kind of a freelance musician. He made his money often from giving lessons, from the sales of some of his music, and also as a performer of many of his solo and concertos, solo works and concertos. Sometime around 1782 or early 1783, Count Rosenberg, who is the administrator of the court theater, approached him with the idea of writing an opera for Vienna. Mozart wrote a German language opera entitled The Abduction from the Seraglio, which premiered in Vienna in 1783. And shortly after that, there was a monumental change in the way the theater was administered in Vienna. Prior to this, the Emperor Joseph II had placed an emphasis on German language theater, but in 1783 he changed his mind. He disbanded his German language troupe and reinstated an Italian troupe that was given to the performance of comic opera in Italian. Mozart saw this as an opportunity to break into the opera community in Vienna, and he continued to search for subjects that would be suitable for operatic treatment. He does tell us in one of his letters to his father that he had read dozens and dozens of librettos and none of them satisfied him, so he was quite picky. During this time, he's also working on other pieces. He's writing more of his piano concertos. He's working on chamber music. There are the 6 quartets he dedicated to Haydn. So he's working, but he's not active in writing opera. Immediately prior to The Marriage of Figaro, he starts work on 2 projects that die on the vine. One is a rather ridiculous opera with the title of The Goose of Cairo. The libretto was provided for him by the man who wrote the libretto for the opera Idomeneo. And then there was a second opera entitled The Deluded Bridegroom, Lo Sposo Deluso. Both of those projects just simply fell apart. So once Mozart latched onto the idea of this play by Beaumarchais, Le Mariage de Figaro, then the ball was rolling, and it was just a matter of time before the work hit the stage.